Hello, you're watching World Talks on TVP World. My name is Sasha Fahrbach. The Geneva talks between Russia, the United States, and Ukraine ended in just 2 hours on day 2, described as, quote, difficult but businesslike, with agreement on monitoring mechanism but persistent disagreement over territory and political terms. Now, as Kyiv calls the results insufficient and Washington pushes back on criticism of its approach, the broader question is whether this round shifted the trajectory of the war at all. Now, joining us now to discuss the latest is Damian Strycharz, Assistant Professor of International Relations at Krakow University of Economics. Good to have you on TVP World. Let's jump right in here. I want to begin with the statement by President Zelensky. Now, he said very much that this is insufficient. I'm quoting here, as of today, we cannot say the result is sufficient. So when we hear something like that, how have we progressed here at all? Who is leading out of all of these different trilaterals? What's your take from his statement?
Hello, thanks for having me. Exactly as you said, the fact that negotiations ended after only 2 hours on Wednesday indicates that Geneva talks have been difficult, and I think it's confirmed in President Zelensky's statement about the difficulty of negotiations and insufficient progress. So, I think we can quite confidently say that negotiations have been unsuccessful in terms of progress in finding an agreement acceptable to both sides. So the trajectory hasn't changed. But at the same time, it should not be surprising. Hopes for a breakthrough were quite low, and in general, Russia shows no signs of serious engagement in peace talks, which means that there is actually no indication of a breakthrough in the near future.
Mm-hmm. If we step back for a moment, though, I mean, this is not the first time we're covering these events quite significantly, but in the longer trajectory of where we're going, do you see any sort of incremental change here? Are we moving towards something? Is it benefiting one side? Is it benefiting more Russia? Are we getting something more for Ukraine? What's the bigger picture here? Where's the direction?
That's a very good question. I think we have seen this pattern repeatedly, right? So at least since summer 2025. So first, we started hearing about a potential deal around the Alaska summit during the holidays, which turned out to be a disappointment both for Moscow and Washington. Then these voices intensified in late November and December with a growing US involvement in the peace talks, with Trump's pressure on Ukraine and Witkoff's frequent visits to Moscow. However, once again, no breakthrough occurred or even came close. More recently, during the January and February talks in Abu Dhabi, which for the first time were held in a trilateral format, so here we can say that there was some progress. But again, we didn't find any agreement. Nothing came out of these talks. So, with Russian continued strikes on Ukraine on a nightly, daily basis, with the Kremlin with its maximalist demands, I think it shows us that we are no closer to the deal. So, it's not to say that these negotiations are pointless. However, there is no real progress because Russia doesn't seem to be interested in peace agreement other than one that accommodates Moscow's maximalist demands. As a result, Moscow's strategy seems to be to delay, to convolute negotiations, while showing, of course, to the Trump administration willingness to reach an agreement.
Mm-hmm. There's also some of the tangibles we're hearing a little bit is also that almost everything is aligned on the military track, at least. That's what came out of some of these talks. But then on a political measure, we're still missing something. Also hearing that the Ukrainians are definitely here, including the U.S., in terms of monitoring. How premature is that? I mean, that does sound significant. I mean, this is, again, some kind of, let's say, premature statements, or is this, how do we analyze those comments there from yesterday?
This is what I also heard about yesterday and Tuesday talks, that there is some progress in terms of military issues, but no progress on political side. And I think this political side is extremely difficult because Russia still wants Ukraine to hand over the rest of Donbas, which Kyiv is not ready to accept. For Ukraine to agree on any deal with Russia, it needs credible security guarantees, including American ones. And here is the main problem, because Putin's conviction is that Russia will win the war sooner or later, right? So Russia is not ready to wave out of its maximalist demands, which means that Putin will be happy to get what he wants at the negotiating table, but if it turns out impossible, he indicated several times that Russia will achieve its goals militarily. So yes, on the one hand, Zelensky says about some progress in terms of military issues about monitoring, but at the same time, it gets us nowhere until there is a political solution, until there is a political agreement. And as we've been saying, it seems that we are far from here, and Putin's conviction about winning the war seems to be the main obstacle. So I think Putin is so convinced about his position because he sees Europe struggling with its own structural crisis. He sees Ukraine being exhausted and dependent on Western support, which then depends on each electoral cycle. And that actually fits his belief in this kind of inevitability of a Russian victory.
And also in terms of what we've heard from the Ukrainian side, also President Zelensky calling this American pressure unfair. This has also been pushed back by the White House. How much of, let's say, damaging can that be at this delicate time?
So, here I think there are two issues. This pressure publicly is quite visible, and this is what Zelensky reacted to. At the same time, what I heard is that behind the closed door, this pressure is not that high as we can see in TVs, as we can see in Trump's statements. But of course, this pressure on Ukraine is firstly unfair, but secondly can be damaging to Ukraine's interests and can be damaging to a lasting peace agreement. But at the same time, Ukraine has shown over last months that it's quite resistant to Washington's pressure. I think the most difficult moment for Kyiv was at the end of November. You probably remember it quite well when there was a political crisis in Ukraine, after which Zelensky fired Yermak, the chief of his presidential staff. And even in this difficult moment, with mounting pressure from the Trump administration, Ukraine still didn't agree to a deal which it saw not that good for its interests. So yes, on the one hand, hopefully the pressure on Ukraine won't be as high as it is at the moment, or at least the Trump administration will be ready to put pressure both on Moscow and Kyiv. But at the same time, the last months have shown that Kyiv can be quite resistant, also because the main military support comes from Europe at the moment, right? Financial military assistance comes from Europe, not from Washington. It gives some leverage to Zelensky in negotiations with the Trump administration.
Yeah, I was going to ask on that point. You mentioned Europe there. I mean, Europe has not been part of these trilateral talks. I mean, Zelensky has said that he does want to include the Europeans, that it's saying here absolutely essential, that are his words. But practically, do you sense that changing, that European officials being involved in some way? Is there more on the side? How is Europe involved in any way, except for, as you said, the military angle?
So we can see European efforts to join negotiations and willingness to be part of this negotiating process. And this is completely understandable, both from the European perspective and also from Ukrainian perspective, of course. And I think Ukraine's statement, Zelensky's statement from yesterday is quite telling, right? That it's essential for Europeans to be at the table. It should be also quite natural, as Europe, as we've just said, is the main supporter of Ukraine, at least for a couple of months already. So the problem is that, firstly, Europe should be at the negotiating table, but at the same time, it would be, in the best case scenario for Europe, would be to speak with the same voice with Washington, because otherwise Europe can be played by Moscow, Washington can be played by Moscow. We need this Western unity, so it is important for Europeans to be at the table, but at the same time, it is important to speak the same voice with Washington. The problem is that, it's not beneficial for Russia to have Europe at the table. Russians don't want to have Europe at the table, and that's the question: how is gonna be solved? Obviously, it's not in Russia's interest because Europe at the moment is the main supporter of Ukraine. Putin knows that it's easier to communicate, that it's easier for him to make a deal with Trump rather than European leaders. Therefore, this is the difficulty. And I think that until Russia sees any interest for Moscow in European presence at the table, Russians will be doing everything to prevent European leaders from joining the negotiations.
I'm conscious of the time. Just really quickly, one sentence. After this round, who has left the most strategically the winner here from this?
I'm afraid we can't speak of winner here. So it's neither beneficial to Ukraine because it's still being attacked on a daily basis by Russia. But at the same time, Russian economy, Russian situation is also pretty difficult. So I'm afraid we can't speak of winners at the moment.
All right. So interesting insights there. Much appreciated there. Professor Damian Strycharz, thank you for your time today.
Thanks very much.
And thank you for watching World Talks, but stay right here on TVP World for more news and commentary. Goodbye.